Today we will discuss what are the 6 lawful bases and I will give you 9 pro tips choosing suitable bases according to your business requirement. You simply cannot process personal data without one. Even perfect security and documentation won't matter. If the lawful basis is missing, the processing is unlawful from the start. By the end of this lesson, you will understand how to choose the right lawful basis for your processing activities and apply practical tips to stay compliant. Article 6 gives us exactly 6 lawful bases for processing personal data. These are the only options under GDPR. First, consent. The individual gives clear, specific permission. Second, contract. Processing that is necessary to perform a contract with individual. Third, legal obligation. Processing required to comply with a legal duty. Vital interest. Processing needed to protect someone's life. This is the rare and applies only in emergencies. Public task processing necessary to perform a task in the public interest or under official authority. 6. Legitimate interest processing necessary for your legitimate interest or those of a third party. Across several bases, you will notice that word necessary. This is because the processing must be genuinely be required for the purpose. At least one basis must apply. Let's start with the consent, one of the most familiar and misunderstood lawful bases. Under Article 411, consent must be specific, informed, and unambiguous. Article 7 sets the bar high, freely given. People must have a real choice with no pressure or negative consequences. Specific. Each purpose needs its own consent. Informed. Individuals must know who you are, what data you collect, why, and how you will use it. Unambiguous. There must be a clear affirmative action. No silence, no pre-tick box. Consent must also be easy to withdraw as it is to give, and you must able to prove when and how it was obtained. Consent comes with the strong rights, including the right to withdraw at any time. If another basis is more appropriate, use that instead. Lawful basis 2. Contract. This basis applies when you need to process personal data to perform a contract with the individual or take pre-contractual steps at their request. The person must be a party to the contract and the processing must be genuinely necessary to deliver what the contract requires, nothing more. Typical examples include processing customer details to ship an order, collecting payment information to complete a purchase, or providing a code before contract is signed. When you rely on this basis, the right to data portability applies. This comes from Article 6(1)(b) Recital 44 of GDPR. The third lawful basis is legal obligation, defined in Article 6(1)(c). This applies when processing is necessary for you to comply with legal duty. The key point is that obligation must come from law, not internal policy, not industry norm. It must be a binding legal requirement. Example includes complying with tax laws, employment laws, health and safety requirements. In these cases, you cannot choose whether to process the data. The law requires it. But this basis is limited. You can only process the data that is genuinely necessary to meet the legal obligation. Anything beyond that needs a different lawful basis. Legal obligation also affect data subject rights. For example, individuals cannot demand erasure if you are legally required to keep the data. Your legal duty overrides the request. The rule is simple. If the law requires the processing, legal obligation applies. If the law doesn't require, the legal basis doesn't fit. The fourth lawful basis is vital interest, found in Article 6(1)(d). This is the narrowest basis and is used only in life or death emergencies. Vital interest applies when processing is necessary to protect someone's life or physical safety. Recital 46 makes it clear you should only rely on this basis when no other lawful basis is available. If a person is capable of giving consent, you must seek consent instead. Typical examples include accessing medical record to treat an unconscious patient, processing data during a natural disaster to coordinate rescue efforts, sharing medical alerts information in severe emergency. But vital interest does not cover routine health and safety activities, standard medical care, or situations where consent can realistically be obtained. Vital interest is an emergency basis for emergency situations. If you find yourself using it regularly, you are almost certainly relying on the wrong lawful basis. Public task applies when processing is required by law to perform a task in public interest or to exercise official authority. It's mainly for public bodies, but private organizations can use it only when a law gives them an official public function. For example, tax administration, social services, public interest research, healthcare delivery, regulatory investigation. Routine admin like HR or payroll doesn't qualify. Individuals have right to object, but not erasure or portability. You must stop processing unless you can show compelling ground. The key test is if this task legally defined as a public interest or official authority function. The sixth lawful basis is legitimate interest. In Article 61F, it applies when processing is necessary for your legitimate interest or those of third party, unless those interests are overridden by individual's right and freedom. It's flexible, but it comes with key requirement. You must carry out balancing tests, identify your interest, show the processing is necessary, and check that it doesn't unfairly impact the individuals. And you should document the assessment. Common uses include fraud detection, security CCTV, IT operations, and marketing with an easy opt out. One limitation: public authorities cannot use the legitimate interest for their public tasks. The strength of this basis is flexibility. The challenge is ensuring that processing is fair, necessary, and properly assessed. If you rely on legitimate interest, you must complete a legitimate interest assessment and LIA. It has three parts. First, the purpose test identifies your legitimate interest. It must be lawful, specific, and genuinely beneficial, not a vague or generic. Second, necessity test. Check whether the processing is truly necessary. If you can achieve the same goal in less intrusive way, this test fails. Third, the balancing test. Weigh your interest against the individual's right and freedom. Consider that the type of data, their expectations, the potential impact, your relationship with them, and whether children data is involved. And finally, document everything. Your LIA shows accountability and helps you to explain your reasoning to individuals. The EDPB guidelines provide detailed support for conducting LIAs. Choosing the right lawful basis. Start with your purpose. If you are fulfilling an order or providing the service, that's contract. If a law requires the processing, use legal obligation. If you have reasonable business needs and people would expect it, consider legitimate interest. Think about your relationship with individuals. Expectations differ for customers and employees. Check the type of data. If it's special category data, you must need an Article 9 decision. Assess reasonable expectations. If people wouldn't expect the processing, the basis may be invalid. Remember, public authorities performing public tasks cannot use legitimate interest. Here are some important rules to follow. Choose your basis before processing. Document your reasoning. Don't switch bases later without strong justification. Different purposes can use different bases. And finally, do not default to consent. Use the basis that truly reflects your purpose. Now that we have covered the six lawful bases under Article 6 GDPR, it's time to see how to apply them in practice. In the next section, we will go through 9 essential tips to help you use these lawful bases correctly in your organization. These tips are based on the guidance from the UK Commissioner Office and the European Data Protection Board, representing best practice across the Europe and UK. These tips will guide you on everything: choosing the right basis, understanding the legal test, knowing when special category data requires extra safeguards. Let's begin with the tip 1. Tip number 1. No lawful basis is safer, better, or more compliant than other. All 6 bases are equally valid under GDPR. The right choice depends entirely on the purpose of your processing. Don't default to consent just because it feels safe. In fact, using consent when another basis is more appropriate can create problems, especially because consent must be freely given or easy to withdraw. Regulators don't judge which basis you prefer. They judge whether the basis you choose accurately reflects your processing activities. So the rule is simple. Choose the basis that generally fits your purpose. Identify your lawful basis before your processing starts. Tip number 2 is all about timing. You must identify your lawful basis before you begin the processing data. Not after, not midway through, but at the planning stage. This means choosing the correct basis early, documenting your reasoning, telling individuals what the base is at the point of collection, usually through your privacy notice. Can you change your lawful basis later? Generally, no. GDPR doesn't allow switching bases once processing has started, unless you have a genuine, fully justified reasoning, and you must inform individuals if you do that. But the best practice is you must build lawful basis assessment into your project planning and DPIAs from very beginning. Make it a standard step, not an afterthought. Tip 3. Necessary means necessary. Tip 3. Focus on the keyword in Article 6 necessary. 5 of 6 lawful bases rely on it, and it has strict legal meaning. Necessary doesn't mean useful, convenient, or standard practice. It means processing must be targeted, proportionate, or genuinely required to achieve your purpose. There must be a clear direct link between the processing and the purpose. If you could achieve the same result in a less intrusive way or without processing personal data at all, then the necessity test fails. Tip number 4. If the law requires it, use legal obligation. Tip 4 is simple but often missed. If law requires you to process personal data, your lawful basis is legal obligation, not consent, not legitimate interest. Why? Because processing is mandatory. Individuals don't have a real choice, and there is no real choice. Consent is not valid under GDPR. Common example includes tax record keeping, employment law requirement, anti-money laundering checks, and health safety records. The key is identify the specific legal provision that creates the obligation. You should be able to point directly to the law or regulation that requires the processing, and this gives you a solid defensible basis, and it's clearly explained to individuals why their data must be processed. Tip number 5. For legal obligation and public task, the law you rely on must be European or member state law. For UK organization, it must be UK law under UK GDPR and Data Protection Act in 2018. What qualifies? European regulation and directive. National laws of European member state, UK Act of Parliament. What does not qualify? US laws, Australian laws, internal policies, contracts, industry codes also don't count. So if you are required to process data under non-EU or UK law but operate in Europe or UK, you may need to rely on legitimate interest or other bases instead. Legal obligation and public tasks have strict geographically limits. Only Europe, member state or UK law can support them. Tip number 6 is about data subject rights, and this is critical. The lawful basis you choose determines which rights individuals have, and not all rights apply to all bases. For example, the right to erasure applies to consent and legitimate interest, but it does not apply when you are relying on legal obligation or public task because the law may require you to keep the data. For contract, erasure applies once the data is no longer necessary. For vital interest, it applies once the emergency ends. The right to data portability only applies to consent or contract, never to legal obligation, public task, or legitimate interest. Right to object mainly applies to legitimate interest and public task. And for direct marketing, it's absolute. Why does this matter? Because your privacy notice must accurately reflects the right that apply to each processing activity. Understanding this ensures you handle rights requests correctly and stay compliant. Tip 7 is all about transparency. Your privacy notice must clearly identify the controller, the organization responsible for the processing. You need to include the controller's legal entity name, contract details for the controller, contact details for your DPO if you have one, and if you are based outside the Europe or UK, the name of your representative. Why does this matter? Because individuals need to know who is accountable for their data, who to contact to exercise their rights, and who regulators can hold responsible. Article 13 and 14 makes this transparency requirement best practices. You can use full legal name, provide multiple contact methods, keep detail up to date, and if you are joint controller, name all controllers involved. Tip 8. Vital interest is for emergencies only. This basis is not for general health, safety, or well being processing. It is reserved for general life or death emergencies. It applies when processing is necessary to protect someone's life. The person cannot give consent or no other lawful basis are available. Make sure it does not apply to routine health and safety measures, standard healthcare, workplace monitoring, situations where consent can reasonably be obtained. Valid examples include treating unconscious patient, responding to natural disaster, sharing critical medical information during an immediate threat to life. Most organizations will never need to use this basis. So remember, vital interest is for true emergencies, nothing else. Tip 9. Special category and criminal data requires a dual basis. Article 6 alone is not enough when you are processing special category data or criminal conviction data. For special category data under Article 9, things like health information, biometric identifiers, political opinion, or sexual orientation, you need two legal bases: Article 6 lawful basis and Article 9 conditions. The same applies to criminal conviction data under Article 10. You need to have an Article 6 basis and Article 10 conditions. Both must be documented, both must be included in your privacy notice. For example, if you process employee health data, you might rely on legal obligation under Article 6 and the employment law condition under Article 9. The dual requirement is not optional. If you only have Article 6 basis, the processing is unlawful, even your Article 6 basis is correct. So, whenever you handle sensitive data, always ask, do we have both bases covered? Practical application. Real world scenarios. Scenario 1. Marketing emails to existing customers. You can use consent or legitimate interest under the soft opt in, but remember, e-privacy rules still apply to electronic marketing. Scenario 2. Employment payroll. Use legal obligation for tax reporting and contract for paying salaries. Both bases may apply to different parts of process. Scenario 3. CCTV for security. Use legitimate interest. You must do balancing test and minimize intrusion. Scenario 4. Fulfilling a customer order. Use contract. The processing is necessary to deliver the goods. These examples show there is no universal lawful basis. You choose one that generally fit the purpose. Scenario 5. Sharing medical data in an emergency. A patient is unconscious and paramedics need their medical history. Lawful basis, here we use vital interest. This is exactly what it's for. Scenario 6. Reporting to financial regulators. You are required by law to submit customer data. Here you will use legal obligation and you must identify the specific law. Scenario 7. Website analytic. You are collecting behavior data to improve your site. Here you will use legal basis consent or legitimate interest, but cookies use may still require e-privacy consent. Scenario 8. Employment background check. You are verifying reference and work history. Lawful basis will be legitimate interest with a balancing test. Checks must be proportionate to the role. These examples show how you can choose your lawful basis, and that depends on purpose, context, and expectations. Let's wrap up with the essential compliance action your organizations need to take. First, documentation requirement. You must maintain a record of processing activities under Article 30. Document which lawful basis applies to each processing activity. Record your reasoning for choosing that basis. Keep your legitimate interest assessment where that is applicable, and document consent record and withdrawal mechanism. Second, privacy notice requirement. Include the lawful basis in your privacy notice. Update notice when processing purposes or basis changes. Provide privacy information at the point of collection and make sure your notice are easily accessible, written in clear plain language. Third, staff training. Train your data handler or identifying the correct lawful basis. Ensure project team assess lawful basis during the planning stage and provide regular refresher trainings on Article 6 requirements. Good documentation, clear privacy notices, and well-trained staff, these are the foundation of ongoing compliance. Regular reviews are essential. Periodically audit your lawful basis for all processing activities. Review when processing purpose change or expand. Reassess when new processing activities are introduced. Update privacy notice to reflect any changes. When it comes to responding an individual rights, understand which rights apply based on your lawful basis. Have a clear process to handle erasure requests appropriately. Respond properly to objection, especially for legitimate interest processing. Facilitate data portability where applicable and train your staff on the rights that correspond to your each basis. And finally, engage your data protection officer or privacy team. Consult your DPO when you are uncertain about lawful basis. Involve your privacy team in new projects from the very beginning. Conduct data protection impact assessment for high-risk processing and seek legal advice for complex processing activities. Remember, compliance is not just about ticking boxes, it's about embedding good data protection practices throughout your organization. We have covered the six lawful bases: consent, contract, legal obligation, vital interest, public task, legitimate interest. We have explored the 9 top tips for applying them correctly. Choose what's appropriate, not what seems safest. Choose your basis before processing begins. You can't change it later without justification. Necessary, it means more than just useful or convenient. Prioritize legal obligation when law requires processing, and law must be EU or UK based for legal obligation and public tasks. Foreign laws does not qualify. Different rights apply depending on your basis. Not all rights apply to all bases. Always name controllers in your privacy notice. Transparency is legal requirement. Vital interest is only for life or death situation. Don't use it for routine health and safety. Special category data required Article 9 and 10, addition to Article 6. This is a dual legal basis requirement. Your lawful basis is your legal foundation for all your processing activities. Choose wisely, document thoroughly, and communicate clearly to data subject